is a much more graphic, first-hand, day-to-day input of the degree to which the United States is relied on, looked to for leadership, and critical to the solutions of so many problems that we face on the planet.
A new survey from the Pew Research Center finds the nation increasingly distrustful of the federal government. The findings released today show that about 1/4 of Americans trust government to do the right thing, always or most of the time. A whopping 73% do not. And those surveyed blame members of Congress. Asked if the political system can work, 56% responded that lawmakers are the problem, and 32% disagreed. Well, a big majority of Americans in a brand new poll say they simply do not trust the U.S. government. The number's the highest in half a century. According to the Pew Research Center, nearly 8 in 10 Americans, 8 in 10, do not trust the folks in Washington to solve our national problems. Only 22% say that almost always or most of the time they do.
We are the indispensable nation, and I think that it is clear to me more than ever before, there's no longer anything foreign about foreign policy. And I said in my confirmation hearing that I think so much of foreign policy today is economic policy, frankly, and we need to think about that more as we transition, as we think about this budget.
Neil Gohar is a political commentator who writes extensively on development economics.
After decolonization after the Second World War, we moved into the era of from physical military colonization into a more sophisticated kind of economic colonization. And when the IMF came into being, the International Monetary Fund, these instruments became instruments of colonization, of domination. I mean, after all, what is the IMF? It is basically a bank to help countries, especially in the third world, overcome immediate balance of payment deficit problems. Now, they have been lending willy-nilly to third world governments, knowing that those were corrupt governments, knowing that they were undemocratic governments, knowing that this money would never be returned, it will be misapplied, misused, in some cases even embezzled. IMF is seen as an instrument of economic colonization, as an instrument by which America can continue to politically dominate the world, but through economic domination.
On Syria, we've contributed nearly $385 million to a growing humanitarian crisis. We're going to have to think more about, obviously, what we're going to do there and how. I'm sure we'll talk about it today. But it's made a difference that we just send something like food and flour to the Aleppo bakeries, or that we have, in fact, provided food and sanitation to the Atme refugee camp.
أزمات خانقة بات يعيشها المواطن السوري، أغلبها اقتصادية تمس حياته اليومية ومتطلبات معيشته، لنراه متحيرا بين أزمات عدة لم يعرفها من قبل.
لا كهرباء، لا غاز، لا مازوت، الخبز عم ضل 6-7 ساعات لنجيب رغيف خبز.
بدنا غاز، بدنا كهرباء والمي، خاصة المي كمان صاروا يقطعوا. في عنا أزمة الكهرباء والمي، هدول أهم شيء.
سعر ربطة الخبز عم بتراوح بال200 لل250 حسب تجار السوق مثل ما بقولوا. والمازوت، حتى المازوت كمان بال225 250، البنزين كمان نفس الشيء. إذا انوجد جرة الغاز 5000 إذا لقينا.
بدنا غاز، بدنا خبز، بدنا محرامات.
كل ذلك يعود لتصاعد الأعمال الإرهابية في بعض المدن من جهة، واستهداف للبنية التحتية وقطع الطرق من جهة أخرى. محافظة حلب عانى سكانها الكثير بعد أن عاثت يد الإرهاب دمارا وخرابا فيها، مستهدفة خطوط تغذية المدينة من ماء وكهرباء، كما عملوا على قطع الطرق لمنع وصول أي دعم حكومي.
اليوم لتر المازوت ب200 ليرة بمدينة حلب، مو حرام. خربوا بيوتنا هالجيش الحر اللي مسمين حالهم جيش حر.
مسلحين هدول الله ينعنوا ينعى ساعة اللي دخلوا فيها هالبلد.
نحن صامدين ولآخر وقت، بس طلباتنا إنه واحد يصل طلباتنا للشعب. المرأة بتركض بتشيل بدونة مي عشان تعبي مي. خبز عم نتم 3 أيام بلا خبز، عم نوقف خير الله مشان الخبز. كهرباء ما في، طب شلون واحد يعيش؟
هلا هي حرية، هي ما هي حرية ولا شفنا الحرية، لا. نحن شفنا الإهانات، شفنا الخبز الزحمات. لهلا أنا أولادي معاقين، لهلا ما دعوا إنه جمعة خبز ما في ببيتي.
تحديات كبيرة يعيشها أهالي حلب، لكن رغم صعوبتها لم تزعزع إيمانهم بمقدرة رجال الجيش العربي السوري بالوقوف والتصدي لكل من يعبث بأمن واستقرار الوطن.
الجيش الله يعطيه العافية ولبسه العافية، بارك الله فيهم والله قدرنا عن كافيهم.
عرايس الجيش العربي السوري الله يحميه والله ينصره والله يوفقه.
الجيش الله يوفقهم والله يحميهم، لأن هالجيش هو اللي عم يعيد الأمان لهالوطن، وهو الروح لهالوطن.
الله يحميه لأني ابني عسكري، الله يحمي الجميع. أنا ابني عسكري، أنا لما بشوف ابني فيه.
هم السوريون بصمودهم، بعزيمتهم، بحبهم لوطنهم يواجهون كافة الصعوبات ليعود الأمان والاطمئنان لوطنهم الغالي سوريا.
Fear has gripped Aleppo amid a rise in kidnappings and lootings in this ancient city in northern Syria. People of Aleppo blame such acts on the foreign-backed insurgents, the members of the so-called Free Syrian Army.
The so-called Free Syrian Army kidnapped me and looted my car. My family gave them 1 million Syrian pounds to set me free.
Armed men enter an area and force its residents out of their homes and then rob those homes. They also kidnap civilians for ransom money. Militants kidnapped my neighbor and asked for 5 million Syrian pounds to release him. The money was paid, but they killed him anyway.
On its website, the BBC has spoken about worries over the behavior of the militants in Aleppo. Such acts are rarely reported by Western media, as Western governments offer all kinds of support to the so-called Free Syrian Army. The BBC also admitted that people in Aleppo have turned away from the militants.
I don't think there's a genuine shift in Western media regarding their coverage of the situation in Syria, but I believe Western countries are being pressured by their societies who want to know the full truth as they hear truth on other outlets. We might witness a change on such media in the near future because the militants are being defeated.
The report about kidnappings and lootings by the insurgents come as they have stepped up their attacks on civilians in Aleppo and Idlib using car bombs and homemade missiles. The attacks have left dozens of civilians dead. The Syrian government says such acts are aimed at putting the blame on government forces to pile up international pressure on Damascus. It is not the first time terrorist attacks coincide with the UN Security Council meeting on Syria. The acts of foreign-backed insurgents are no secret to the Syrians, as they are the ones who have suffered the most because of the militants' acts. However, Western media reports on insurgents are considered a distortion of realities on the ground. Hamad Ali, Press TV, Damascus.
I have traveled to the Middle East already 3 times as secretary in North Africa. And there we have a phenomenon taking place which requires a greater response, frankly, than even we are now currently able to provide. And we need to think about how we're going to change that. And I'd love to talk to members about it. But leaders there are facing an enormous challenge with a huge burgeoning youth population, absence of jobs, increased radicalism. And we have to ask ourselves whether we are doing enough to respond to a growing pace of increase in extremism versus the adoption of rule of law and democratic process. That is our challenge, I think, in this generation. And I personally believe there are ways that we can address it. To that end, the budget asks, at least initially, for $580 million for the Middle East and North Africa Incentive Fund so that we can give reformers the tools and resources that they may begin to need in order to fight on behalf of these young people in the future. Remember, Tahrir Square was not an Islamic revolution, nor was Tunisia. Tunisia was a fruit vendor who wanted dignity and respect and the ability to sell his goods. And he resented police officer intrusion on that process.
Ce gouvernement a échoué pendant une année et demie et le bouquet, c'est l'assassinat de Chokri Belaïd. Et donc, moi, je pense que si c'est honorablement, ce gouvernement doit partir et le chef du gouvernement doit assumer sa responsabilité immédiatement. Je demande que ce soit aujourd'hui, c'est pas demain, c'est pas après-demain, c'est pas avec des conditions, c'est pas, il faut que ce soit fait parce que aussi c'est la règle du jeu politique. Si un gouvernement échoue, il doit partir. Le ministère de l'Intérieur doit assumer sa responsabilité et assurer la sécurité, ma sécurité personnelle et la sécurité de mes filles. Voilà. Et je n'ai reçu aucune réaction.
On n'accepte pas le sang. On n'accepte pas la révolution est venue pour aider les pauvres, pour avoir des gens modestes.
On a vécu 23 ans de dictaterie. Notre dictateur a été éliminé. Il y a une naissance de nouveaux dictateurs. Monsieur Cheikh Rachid Ghannouchi est un homme qui déteste le peuple tunisien.
Tahrir Square was a bunch of young people with their cell phones, excited about the possibilities of sharing the life that a lot of other people in the world get to live, and hoping they could do so in Egypt. And it was later, when the military delivered an election, contrary to many people's expectations, that the Brotherhood came in and picked up the pieces.
We were protesting peacefully, chanting normal slogans, but all of a sudden we saw tear gas canisters being fired without any alert.
A day of protest on the streets of Cairo. Hundreds march on the headquarters of the Prosecutor General. They're calling for the fall of the government. Their group, the April the 6th Youth Movement, initially backed Mohamed Morsi for the presidency last year. But not now.
We are here to say that the revolution is continuing until it achieves its goals of freedom, justice, and dignity. We are telling the Muslim Brotherhood regime, you are a failure. And we are telling the United States, you are supporting a failed regime, one that is against democracy and is killing freedom.
Cairo's Tahrir Square and the aftermath of Friday's angry demonstrations, here and outside of the presidential palace. But it's the security forces' actions to stop the protests which have shocked Egyptians. A 23-year-old was killed, and this. Caught on live television, a man stripped naked and beaten by security forces before being bundled into a van.
I can't bear seeing something like that. How can someone drag someone on the ground like that? This man is a protester like us. This is unfair. We are in Egypt. This should not be happening. Enough. It's too much blood.
The United States cannot be strong at home if we're not strong in the world.
No one questions that America is the most powerful nation on earth. The issue is whether they should arrogantly be judge, jury, and executioner of what is right.